Number 6. Porsche 959. Did you know Bill Gates once picked a fight with the entire US government over a car? The car in question was the Porsche 959, a late 80s supercar so far ahead of its time that America basically said, nope, too advanced for us. Twin turbos, all-wheel drive, computer-controlled suspension. This thing was decades ahead of its time. Naturally, Gates wanted one, but when his 959 landed on American soil, Customs immediately impounded it. The Department of Transportation wouldn't allow it on US roads because it failed to meet crash and emission standards. And the story that always gets told is this: the DOT demanded 4 complete cars for crash testing, but Porsche refused. Why? Because Porsche was basically going broke building it. Each 959 was priced at $225,000 in 1987, but Porsche was losing a significant amount of money building each car, estimated to be over $400,000 US dollars. Porsche knew that destroying 4 of the 959s would have been financial suicide, and without those tests, the US banned the car outright. That meant no American could legally drive a 959 until the 25-year import rule kicked in, which wouldn't be until 2012. But Gates had no other option but to wait. For 13 years, his 959 sat locked away in a Seattle storage facility while he paid $28 a day plus a $500 annual bond just to keep it stateside. By the end, he had burned through over $133,000 without ever turning the key. At first, it seemed like all he could do was wait, but then came a turning point. Gates teamed up with retired car racer and dealer Bruce Canepa and attorney Warren Dean to push for a solution. Together, they took the fight to the EPA, NHTSA, and even major automakers, crafting a compromise that could change the rules for good. The idea was straightforward. If a car was rare out of production and built in very limited numbers, fewer than 500, it could be imported, as long as it passed EPA emissions and was driven less than 2,500 miles per year. At first, the plan hit dead ends, but then came the breakthrough. In 1998, the proposal was quietly attached to a larger Senate transportation bill. When President Clinton signed it into law, things finally began to move. By 2000, the Department of Transportation had officially established what we now know as the show or display rule. Thanks to Gates, the 959 finally got its American passport, and every collector since has benefited from the loophole. Number 5. Chevrolet Corvair. In the early 1960s, America loved cars, but not safety. Fatal crashes kept rising, yet automakers shrugged it off, blaming the driver, the nut behind the wheel. Safety wasn't a priority because no law required it. Seatbelts were optional, and crash tests? Pure science fiction. And then came the car that turned the blind spot into a bullseye, the Chevrolet Corvair. Launched as the 1960 model year, the Corvair was Chevy's moonshot. A rear-engined, air-cooled compact that looked more European than American, it was unlike anything the brand had ever built. So much so that Chevy sold nearly 250,000 of them in the first year alone. America's biggest automaker was proving it could innovate, but hidden under its sleek looks was a problem waiting to make headlines: the swing axle rear suspension. In everyday driving, it was fine, but push it hard in an emergency maneuver, and it could snap, sending the car spinning, or worse, rolling over. For most buyers, it wasn't a death sentence, but it wasn't the kind of gamble people expected from Chevrolet either. And that's when a young lawyer named Ralph Nader smelled blood in the water. In 1965, he dropped a grenade into the auto industry with his book Unsafe at Any Speed. Page after page, he hammered the Corvair, branding it a one-car accident. Suddenly, this quirky compact car wasn't just an experiment. It was a rolling death trap and public enemy number one. Now, what do you think GM's response should have been? Well, instead of putting out the fire, they poured gasoline on it. Instead of addressing the issue, they hired investigators to tail Nader, digging for dirt. But the smear attempt exploded in their faces, transforming Nader into a folk hero and his book into a bestseller. The backlash was too loud to ignore, and the story had grown too big for Detroit to contain. The public demanded answers, and Washington listened. In 1966, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act, the first law that gave the federal government real power to regulate car safety. Out of it came the National Highway Safety Bureau, the same agency we now know as NHTSA. Number 4. Ford Pinto. This is the car that proved a horrifying truth. Sometimes it's cheaper for a corporation to let you burn alive than to fix the problem. Meet the Ford Pinto, America's most infamous rolling fire hazard. Back in the early 1970s, Ford was desperate. The gas crisis was looming. Japanese imports like the Toyota Corolla were eating their lunch, and executives wanted a subcompact car fast. Normally, developing a car took around 43 months. The Pinto? It was rammed through in just 25. Corners were cut, checks were skipped, and somewhere in the chaos, a deadly flaw slipped through the cracks. And And that flaw couldn't have been in a worse place. The fuel tank. Just inches from the rear bumper, completely unprotected, it was a time bomb waiting for impact. At crash speeds as low as 20 miles per hour, the tank could rupture like a shaken soda can, spraying fuel everywhere. One spark, and the Pinto transformed from commuter car to crematorium. And this is where the story shifts from bad engineering to corporate horror movie. The most unbelievable part? Ford knew. Internal crash tests had already revealed the danger. Engineers suggested fixes, a plastic shield, stronger frame rails, even relocating the tank. And the cost? About $11 a car. But the executives didn't sign off. Instead, they pulled up the spreadsheets. In what's now known as the Pinto memo, Ford's bean counters literally priced out human life. A death? $200,000. A serious burn injury? $67,000. A totaled car? $700. They crunched the numbers and decided lawsuits, an estimated $49.5 million, were cheaper than spending $137 million on fixes. For years, Pinto crashes kept happening. Victims were burned alive, survivors were left disfigured, families dragged Ford into court. But on paper, the Pinto still technically met federal safety standards. Under the law at the time, Ford wasn't breaking any rules. That's when the government decided to play hardball. NHTSA engineers set up a new crash test, one that mimicked real life, not the loopholes. They slammed a gas-filled Pinto with a bullet car at 35 miles per hour, headlights blazing to guarantee ignition. The result? A Hollywood-style fireball. Finally, Ford had nowhere to hide. In 1978, under mounting pressure, they recalled 1.5 million Pintos, the largest recall in Ford's history at the time. The scandal didn't just scar Ford, it rewrote the rulebook. Crash tests became tougher, oversight got sharper, and the Pinto memo became a business school horror story. Before we reveal the final three, make sure to leave a like and share your thoughts on the biggest car scandal we've mentioned so far. Number 3, Ford Explorer. Picture this. It's the late 1990s, and America is obsessed with SUVs. Bigger, taller, tougher. That's what everyone wanted. Families ditched their sedans for Explorers, Blazers, and Grand Cherokees. But there was one problem that wasn't getting too much highlighted. These things had the balance of a toddler on a sugar rush. Statistically, SUVs were far more likely to roll over. And between 1991 and 2000, fatal crashes involving them spiked by 37%. Suddenly, America's favorite family haulers were starting to look more like family hazards. And when cars start flipping like pancakes, you know something has to change. That rising danger set the stage for one of the most important safety innovations in modern cars, electronic stability control, or ESC. At its core, ESC is like having a secret co-driver who knows when you're about to lose control. Using sensors, it compares where the steering wheel says you want to go with where the car is actually headed. If the two don't match, say in a skid or an evasive swerve, it quietly applies brakes to individual wheels and trims engine power to keep everything lined up. You don't hear it, you don't feel it, but you also don't end up upside down in a ditch. In fact, Mercedes-Benz was the first to put ESC into production cars in 1995, but this German automaker wasn't the reason governments made it mandatory. That honor belongs to a very different machine, the Ford Explorer. The Explorer was America's sweetheart SUV until it became infamous for doing somersaults at highway speeds. The turning point was the Firestone tire scandal of 2000, when blowouts on underinflated tires caused Explorers to roll over in horrifying numbers. Ford blamed Firestone. Firestone blamed Ford. But as investigators dug deeper, it became clear the Explorer's design, tall body, narrow stance, soft suspension, was just as guilty. In fact, federal stats showed that 1 in every 2,700 Explorers built in those years rolled over and killed someone. So in 2007, NHTSA dropped the hammer. Every new light vehicle sold in America had to come with electronic stability control by 2012. No exceptions. And here's the payoff. ESC worked. Studies showed it cut single vehicle crashes by a third and slashed fatal SUV rollovers by more than half. In other words, the Explorer's embarrassing tumble ended up forcing the entire auto industry to stand tall. Number 2, Volkswagen. Type 2 pickup. Most government crackdowns on cars happen because of safety, emissions, or corporate scandal. But the Volkswagen Type 2 pickup, it was wiped out of America by chickens. Yes, this humble bird single-handedly triggered one of the longest-lasting trade wars in automotive history. In the early 1960s, America was drowning in chicken. Farmers were producing record numbers of birds, and while Americans were happily chewing through plenty of them, there was still a mountain of surplus. The solution? Ship the extras overseas. And at first it seemed like a win-win. Europe, still ramping up mass farming, suddenly had cheap US chicken pouring into its markets. But what felt like a blessing to consumers was a nightmare for local farmers. Their livelihoods were undercut, and governments in places like France and West Germany weren't having it. They retaliated with tariffs on American chicken. That should have been chickens pecking at tariffs. Case closed. Instead, the fight jumped species. Washington wanted payback. President Lyndon B. Johnson needed a pressure point. Detroit and the United Auto Workers saw their moment. If Europe gets slapped, why not build a wall around American pickups too? Enter the Volkswagen Type 2 pickup. The wrong vehicle at the wrong time. Think microbus trimmed into a flat nose work mule. Cheap to run, easy to park, absurdly useful. Plumbers loved it, couriers loved it, mom and pop shops loved it, and that love spooked Ford and Chevy. If Main Street fell for clever little imports, who's buying F-100s and C-10s? The automakers whispered in Johnson's ear, "Hey, while you're slapping Europe with tariffs over chicken, why not stick it to those weird Volkswagen trucks too?" And just like that, the chicken tax was born in 1964, a 25% tariff on imported light trucks, officially about chickens, secretly about killing the Type 2, and it worked with sniper-like precision. Before the tariff, the Type 2 pickup was carving out a nice little niche. After, it was flatlined. Fewer than 5,000 made it into the US between 1964 and 1967. Then nothing. Volkswagen's commercial trucks and buses disappeared from the US market entirely. Make no mistake, this wasn't collateral damage. This was a hit job. The Type 2 was too clever, too different, too much of a threat to the Detroit playbook. So rather than compete, the big three simply had the government assassinated. Number 1, Dieselgate scandal. For decades, diesel cars had a terrible reputation in the US. Loud, smelly, and dirty. They were seen as something Europeans tolerated, but Americans avoided. But Volkswagen wanted to change that. So in the 2000s, they rolled out a bold promise: clean diesel by running popular Super Bowl commercials. We're talking about commercials that showed happy families, wide open roads, and plenty of smug looks at the gas pump. Cars like the Volkswagen Jetta, Golf, and Passat were marketed as fuel efficient, fun to drive, and eco-friendly enough to rival electric hybrids like the Toyota Prius. VW had cracked the code, or so it seemed, and for a while people believed it. Reviewers praised them, environmentalists applauded them, and VW's sales numbers soared. But every too-good-to-be-true story eventually hits a snag, and this one unraveled in 2015. That's when a small environmental research group stumbled on something strange. They were testing VW diesels on the road and noticed the numbers didn't add up. These green machines weren't just failing emission standards. They were blowing past them like an 18-wheeler in the fast lane. Nitrogen oxide emissions, the stuff that causes smog and asthma, were up to 40 times higher than the legal limit. That wasn't just a little white lie, that was a full-blown deception. So how did VW pull this off? Well, with a trick straight out of a spy movie. Buried deep in the car's software was what regulators later called a defeat device. Basically, the car could tell when it was hooked up to an emissions test. During the test, it behaved like a saint, running all the controls that kept emissions low. But the second it hit real roads, the controls switched off, the engine ran hotter, and the car belched out pollution like a 1970s factory. In other words, 11 million diesel cars worldwide were living a double life. And when this groundbreaking news broke, it was like someone had caught the honor student cheating on every single exam. Regulators went into overdrive. The Environmental Protection Agency and Department of Justice filed lawsuits, and suddenly Volkswagen was facing not just fines, but a full-blown criminal case. By 2017, Volkswagen had pleaded guilty to 3 felony counts: conspiracy to defraud the United States and violate the Clean Air Act, obstruction of justice, and importation of merchandise by means of false statements. The automaker had to pay about $15 billion in the US alone to clean up the mess, including buybacks, lease terminations, and compensation for environmental harm. And by 2020, the automaker had paid $33.3 billion in fines, penalties, financial settlements, and buyback costs. The Dieselgate scandal didn't just destroy Volkswagen's reputation, it also buried diesel's future in America. What was once promoted as the perfect bridge between gas and electric suddenly became a dirty word. We hope you enjoyed this video. Here's another one you'll love. As always, thanks for watching.